So pivoting to
Agreed.
something, I want to say a phrase, and I want you to tell me your thoughts on it, and then we can go back and forth if we disagree, if we agree, whatever it is, whatever. But this is not a phrase that I am saying that I believe in. I'm not saying I don't believe in because I don't want to bury the lead. I don't want to let you know my answer to you
Cool.
guys. Black people can't be racist.
That is funny. I mean, I literally was just talking to my students about this a couple weeks ago in my race class. All right, so here's what it is. I will say that yes, Black people can treat people differently or negatively based on their race. They can exhibit racial biases, right? They can discriminate against people based on their race. Um, the thing about this, though, is that when you think about racism and how it works, racism really is one. It's not about the individuals, right? Individual people enact racism, yes, but racism broadly in our country is not about individuals, right? Even if all the racist individuals were to go away or change their minds, we'd still have racism because it's systemically embedded in our country. So yeah, Black people and other people of color can be quote unquote racist, but really the way racism works is that it involves power, right? And if it doesn't involve power to like change things, reallocate resources, keep people from doing things, then it's not as significant, right? It doesn't have as significant of an impact. And so Black people collectively just don't have the power to enact racism in the same ways that white Americans do. So can they be racist? Yes, they can say and do racist things, but does it have the same impact as racism more broadly? Absolutely not, no. What are
And
your
that's
thoughts? This interesting.
yeah. And so I'm in alignment with the way you explained it. What I'm not in
Okay.
alignment with, not necessarily with you, but with that phrase, is how it is ignorant purposely. I feel for most people, because most people who say Black people can't be racist are somewhat educated, is
Hmm.
ignorant of what that person means. They know what
Yeah,
the average person means when they say racism. They don't mean the systemic structures. They don't mean the history of
right.
racism and all that, even though those exist. And Black people simply do not have the power to enact those. Yes. But that's not what they're saying. And so when you say a
Hmm.
phrase like Black people can't be racist, you are now kind of disinviting that person from the conversation because they're going to kind of check out. Because again, you have to set it up in a way that makes it clear to them what you mean. And so answering it the way
Sure.
you did is, I think, the right way to do it. You're like, yes, Black
Hmm.
people can take racist actions. Black people can be individually racist. They can do all this stuff. But there's other piece of the racism that we're talking about here. And so
Yeah.
I get concerned when I hear people say that phrase or parrot that phrase, really is what I feel like a lot of them are doing,
Hmm.
because they are, again, willfully, I feel so, being ignorant of what you're saying to someone. Yes, everything that you're saying is correct because racism is more than just your individual actions and how I interact with another
Hmm.
human being. But you know that other person isn't necessarily taking it that way. So you need to elaborate. You need to not just parrot a phrase and get something that can go on a sign and go out there
Hmm.
and actually have that conversation and invite them into the understanding of what we're trying to actually get to.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think a part of why that ends up happening is like you said, right? Most people, well, so the what goes along with that phrase that we were talking about how other people know what folks are talking about when they ask about who is being racist or not. So what I know from the research and stuff that I'm doing is that the vast majority of people, right, your average American, they don't really understand what racism is. They simply don't. They don't have a good understanding of it. They definitely don't understand it as a systemic structural thing, right, that's embedded in our country. And so that ends up being a problem in and of itself. And so one of the things that I've been saying a lot more recently, right, these are not things that I made up myself, right? Like this is on built off of other scholarship and other research that other people have been doing for years. Is that to me? I think the question that kind of underlies that phrase of can Black people be racist or not is who can be racist or who is being racist. And I think that question is the wrong question. I think it is a question that is very distracting, right? Because the bigger, broader, more significant picture is systemic and structural racism. And so when most people, when they're asking about who can be racist, they're doing so with the intention of being able to like dissipate that conversation, right? To be able to say like, haha, you're racist too, which means you can't point to me and talk about my racism or about white people broadly as racist. You can't do that because now we're focused on the fact that you can be a racist and you can be a racist, right? And so I like I tell my students and other people, I think that's the wrong question, right? I think the question you should be asking is what forms of racism are more significant and have the most significant outcomes, right? Because racism is not about intentions, it's about outcomes. It's about what happens, right? And so if you're to me, like I said, just don't ask that question. It's the wrong one. Focus more on like, well, what forms of racism exist? How are they problematic? And what can we do to fix them? Not like, who's a racist, are you or not? That's why I don't really actually run around calling people racist anymore that much, because I don't know that it's very helpful. It definitely is true sometimes, right? But it's not as helpful as, let's talk about racism, structural, systemic, ideological, and how then people can contribute to that, even if they don't know they are, or if they don't mean to, right?
I just want to say for a second there, you sounded like the worst episode of Oprah ever. Like, and you can be a racist, and you can be a racist. But I think I agree with everything you just said, because it is usually pointed out to be disingenuous in the conversation, but also I think sometimes people say it as a way of not having the conversation. And I'm talking specifically in this sense, and usually we're not supposed to do this in public, but I'm gonna go ahead and do it. Specifically in that sense, when Black people say the phrase that Black people can't be racist, they are not adding to the conversation. They are looking at another way to shut that conversation down. Instead of having the conversation you're talking about and teaching somebody about systemic and structural racism, they want to say that we don't have the power to be racist. Again, which is a factual statement, but it is not making the conversation better to say that. I think you're saying something that is true but not helpful, and I think we get caught in those a lot. And I think pivoting back to our one of the conversations we had kind of before we came online and a little bit in this conversation, that's exactly what happens on Facebook all the time. People are not adding to the conversation. They're saying things that either, again, come from a politicized standpoint, they come from a tribal standpoint, and they don't add. They just shut the conversation down, or they pivot it off its main topic. And I hate when I do this. I always forget it. I think that's the straw man fallacy or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so I think that, again, I think that's one of the ways we can all get better if we agree to have genuine conversations. Disagree if you must, do whatever you need to do, but have a genuine conversation. Don't just shut it down with phrases and stuff. Like, one of the ones I always go back to is whenever you start talking about sexual assault, like, well, women sexually assault men too. I'm like, okay, but how does that add to the conversation? Nobody's talking about that. And again, if we want to talk about percentages, you know what I mean? You're not going to get anywhere with that conversation. So,
it's really crazy that ends up happening. And a lot of it too ends up being, just fallacies in logic that people have, right? I took a class on logic randomly in undergrad, and it was so intriguing because it kind of clued me into this idea that most of the time when we're having arguments, we're actually arguing two different things. And if you're not arguing about the same thing, you're never going to be able to get to an agreement or an understanding, even not even an agreement, an understanding, because you're talking about A and I'm talking about B. And so you keep pushing B, or I keep pushing B, you keep pushing A, right? Instead of like us both talking about A and then moving on to B, right? Like, that's what ends up happening on Facebook and all these other places, because folks are just like, this is what I think. And it has nothing to do with maybe the original question that was asked or the article that was shared or the actual perspective that was given. They're just arguing a point, and they don't realize they're actually arguing about two completely separate things.
Thanks for checking out Starting Nowhere. If you want to catch more Starting Nowhere, make sure you like and subscribe.